When Dana White laughed and said Chuck Norris wouldn't last a round against a rookie, the arena itself went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from respect. It was sharper, tinged with disbelief, like a collective gasp caught in the throats of 20,000 people. UFC event nights were supposed to be a blur of noise, beer in plastic cups, chants that rose and fell like tides, cameras sweeping for reactions. But this was different. This was personal. Dana White stood in the octagon under the floodlights, microphone in hand, shirt sleeves rolled, face glowing with that mix of confidence and provocation he had built his career on. His grin was broad, almost too broad, like he knew exactly what he had just triggered, and maybe he did. "We could put him against the weakest fighter on the roster," Dana said, letting the pause build before he dropped the rest. "And he'd still lose." The arena erupted. Some laughed outright, clapping their friends on the shoulders. Others groaned, the kind of guttural sound you hear when something crosses a line. People weren't just reacting to the words, they were reacting to the audacity of them. Chuck Norris wasn't in the cage, wasn't part of the show. He was sitting a few rows back, in the shadows, watching like any other spectator. Or at least, he had been until that moment. The cameras, eager for the story, swung toward him. The screens high above the octagon filled with his face. There he was, plain jacket, no entourage, no spotlight. The crowd expected a smile, some acknowledgement, maybe a shrug. Instead, he gave them nothing. His expression was calm, neutral, his eyes steady. Not angry, not amused, just there. That calmness was unsettling. The more Dana laughed, the more the contrast showed. "Come on," he said, pacing the cage. "You all know it's true. Legends? Myths? They don't last in real fights. The octagon tells the truth. And the truth is, Chuck Norris couldn't handle 2 minutes with the guys warming our bench." Some in the crowd cheered him. Others booed. Phones came up, recording, posting, turning a cheap provocation into something larger. The split was clear. Half the audience eating up the bravado, half bristling at the disrespect. On the big screen, Chuck's eyes didn't waver. He didn't raise a hand or lean toward the camera. But there was something in the way he looked straight ahead, steady, unflinching, that made the noise around him feel shallow. A fan in the front row shouted, "Show some respect!" The microphone didn't catch it, but the people nearby did, and they repeated it, louder, until the chant tangled with Dana's laughter. "Respect him. Respect him." Others drowned it out with jeers. The arena turned into a split chorus of loyalty and mockery. Dana thrived on division. He pointed toward Chuck's section, grinning like a man who had cornered a bear from the safety of a cage. "See? Half of you know I'm right. You grew up on his movies, sure. But movies aren't fighting." The camera cut back to Chuck. He didn't blink. The people sitting near him leaned away slightly, sensing that his stillness meant more than any outburst could. A boy, 2 rows back, whispered to his father, "Why isn't he saying anything?" The father didn't answer. He was staring too, realizing silence could be louder than a shout. Chuck lifted his chin slightly, no more than a fraction, and the camera caught it. The screen magnified the smallest gesture into a signal. The noise faltered. People leaned forward. For 1 second, the arena seemed to forget about Dana White's grin and focused entirely on the man who hadn't spoken a word. It was then that the atmosphere shifted. What had started as a joke was no longer funny. It wasn't about movies versus fighting, or young versus old. It had turned into something else: pride, history, the quiet challenge in a pair of steady eyes. And though Chuck hadn't said a thing, Everyone in the building felt it. A fight had already begun, and it wasn't happening inside the cage. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, Bello. Dana knew exactly how to ride a crowd. The moment he felt the tension tip from laughter to unease, he doubled down. All right, he said, raising a hand as though he were about to deliver a ruling from a judge's bench. You don't believe me? You think the myth still walks? Fine, let's prove it. The arena stirred. Heads lifted, cameras steadied, the sound shifting from scattered jeers to a single rolling wave of anticipation. Everyone knew Dana's rhythm. When he paused like that, he was about to throw gasoline on the fire. We don't need John Jones. We don't need Izzy or Volk. I don't even need a ranked fighter, he went on, pacing the cage like a showman drawing a circle around his trick. Let's pick the weakest guy on the roster. Bottom of the barrel. Hell, the kid's got more losses than wins, but he'd still smoke Chuck Norris. The Jumbotron switched, cutting away from Dana's smirk to the tunnel entrance. Out walked a young fighter in fight shorts and a loose hoodie, bouncing on his toes like he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. He was lean, wiry, the kind of body that hadn't yet filled in but carried enough muscle to move fast. The nameplate flashed under him. Eli Scrap Martinez, 23 years old. 6 fights, 4 losses. A kid who had promise, but not enough polish. Exactly the type Dana could use for this circus. Eli jogged down the ramp with a grin stretched wide. He slapped a few hands in the front row before sliding under the ropes into the octagon. A microphone found him before his feet were even steady. He snatched it, pointed it at Chuck's section in the crowd, and leaned close. I grew up watching your movies, man, he said, voice cracking slightly from adrenaline. Walker, Texas Ranger, sidekicks, all of it. But movies ain't fighting. The crowd exploded, half in cheers, half in boos. The split wasn't neat. It cut diagonally through the arena, friends turning to argue with each other mid-shout. One section roared, "Respect him," while another countered with, "Sit him down." The noise shook the rafters, a fractured anthem of loyalty and mockery. On the screen, Chuck was still seated, the same calm posture, hands folded lightly on his lap. He hadn't blinked at the jab, but the camera caught his eyes, and those eyes had not moved from Eli. They were steady, deliberate, like a teacher watching a student act out before class. Dana clapped his hands together in delight. That's it. Let the kid say it plain. We don't live in the past here. We live in the cage. And in the cage, Chuck Norris doesn't make it out of round 1. Eli laughed nervously, pacing the mat with the microphone still in hand. He played to the crowd, spreading his arms. What's it gonna be, Chuck? You and me? You think you can still hang in here? He tapped his chest twice. This ain't Hollywood. The jeers and cheers twisted into a single, sustained roar. Fans stood on their seats. Beer sloshed from cups. Commentators at ringside traded uneasy glances, knowing this was no longer just promotional theater. Then, for the first time that night, Chuck moved. He rose slowly, deliberately, as if each inch of motion was part of a decision he had already made. The arena noticed immediately. The second he pushed himself up from his seat, the sound shifted. Screams collapsed into a hush. Whistles died mid-breath. The entire crowd held itself back, waiting. Chuck didn't look at Dana. He didn't look at the cameras. His gaze stayed on Eli, the rookie dancing inside the cage. He took a few measured steps forward, moving down from his row toward the arena floor. Each footfall seemed to thicken the silence. Eli tried to grin wider, tried to keep the mask of bravado fixed on his face. He called into the mic again, but his voice cracked. Try not to break a hip on the way down, old man. The joke landed awkwardly, even among those who had cheered for him seconds before. Dana laughed too hard, covering the stumble. Don't worry, kid. He won't get that far. The Jumbotron split-screened the two men. Chuck walking slowly toward the cage, expression steady, and Eli bouncing nervously but with fire still in his eyes. The difference was stark. Youth loud and brash, age quiet, but heavy. A chant broke out from somewhere high in the rafters. Chuck! 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 At first, just a handful of voices, but it spread like a fuse catching fire. Within seconds, thousands were shouting his name. People who had laughed minutes before were on their feet, swept up in the force of the moment. Dana White stood in the middle of the octagon, microphone pressed to his lips, but for once he didn't speak. Even he knew when noise was bigger than him. Eli lowered the mic and muttered something off-mic, visible only in the twitch of his lips. Bring it. Chuck reached the floor, stopped at the edge of the barricade, and looked up. The cameras zoomed in, filling the screens with his face. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just watched. And in that watching, the crowd felt it. The balance had shifted. The rookie had words. Dana had a microphone. But Chuck Norris had the silence. And the silence was winning. The production team moved like stagehands at a funeral. Quiet, fast, purposeful. A coordinator in a headset jogged the barricade, pointing security to open a lane. Ringside commissioners conferred in a huddle, faces pinched. This would be branded as a demonstration, not a sanctioned bout. 3 two-minute rounds, oversized gloves, no elbows, no knees to a downed opponent. The legal caution didn't matter. The air had already hardened into something that felt nothing like a demo. Dana seized the microphone again. His grin said you're welcome, but his voice carried the caution of a man whose lawyers were watching. Exhibition only, he announced, palm open, making it sound like a favor. Nothing crazy, folks. We're here to entertain. He looked pleased with his own restraint, then ruined the effect with one more jab. And to remind you that time is undefeated. A restless shuffle rolled around the arena. You could hear the difference, the way laughter had been replaced by low talk, by people explaining to each other what they thought they were about to see. Camera booms swung wide. The Jumbotron split the world. On one side, Eli Scrap Martinez pacing the canvas. On the other, Chuck, now at floor level, passing the timekeeper's table with the unhurried walk of someone who had nothing left to prove to himself. A cut man offered tape. Chuck shook his head politely and slid his hands into the big 16-ounce gloves. The red so saturated it looked almost black under the lights. He flexed once, testing the seam. A rules official spoke to him, lips moving, fingers chopping the air in the universal signs of no knees, no elbows, no ground and pound. Chuck listened without nodding, as if he already knew the rules that mattered. Inside the cage, Eli kept moving. Bounce, pause, shadow box, each movement too quick, like his body couldn't hold all the adrenaline. He found a camera and played to it, jaw set, eyes bright. Try not to break a hip out there, he said toward the floor mic, not quite smiling. It got a few laughs from the section still hungry for spectacle. It also got a few groans from people who'd started to feel embarrassed for him. Chuck lifted his eyes for the first time since he'd stepped onto the concrete. He didn't respond to the line immediately. He let the noise carry it away, and then let silence wash back over what remained. When he did speak, it was to Eli, not the crowd. You'll learn fast. The line wasn't a threat. It was a prediction. It traveled differently, through the commentators' headsets, through the ribs of people in the cheap seats, arriving everywhere at once. Dana made a circling motion with his hand, ushering them forward. The cage door clanged open. The ref, short sleeves, wide stance, the posture of a man determined to keep his name out of the news, called them to center for the briefest instructions. Eli stuck his glove out, half ritual, half smirk. Chuck touched it, without ceremony. The touch made a small sound the microphones almost caught. Fabric on leather, clean and unforced. Up on the screens, a close-up found Chuck's eyes. No heat, no flash. The calm looked almost alien in a place built to amplify nerves. Eli's close-up, by contrast, showed a grin trying to swallow a tremor. Not fear, exactly. The realization that the thing he'd asked for had become the thing he now had. The chant started again, softer at first, then climbing. Chuck! 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 It was less a cheer than a drumbeat. The people who kept booing had to raise their volume to be heard and, in doing so, lost conviction. The arena was choosing. The briefing ended. The ref stepped back, palms out. The door thudded and latched. On the apron, a production assistant winced at the sound, like someone had shut a vault. Eli couldn't stand still. He rolled his neck, loosened his shoulders, hopped left, then right, tapping the fence as if to prove it was real. He talked, too, not to Chuck anymore, but at him, syllables bouncing off the canvas. Footwork, old man. Keep up. The mic near Blue Corner swallowed half the words. The rest drifted away like steam. Chuck did nothing you could film for hype. He set his feet in a stance that belonged to neither era nor style. Just balance, arranged on purpose. His chin wasn't high or tucked. It was correct. His hands didn't float. They hovered where they would need to be, and not an inch farther out. At the desk, one commentator tried to sound breezy, and didn't quite make it. "This is an exhibition, folks," he said, over-enunciating exhibition. The other left a beat of air and answered quietly, "Yeah." It wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement of what the arena already knew. Dana raised his hand toward the timekeeper like a conductor about to bring in strings. The official flicked his eyes to the ref. The ref nodded. Eli bounced in place one last time, then stilled. Somewhere under the floor, the cooling units hummed. Somewhere above, a light panel cracked softly as it heated. The crowd's noise thinned to a fine, tense line. In the first row, a boy clutched his father's forearm. In the upper deck, a woman mouthed please without being sure who she was speaking to. The bell didn't clang so much as arrive, a sharp report that snapped the air into present tense. Eli shot forward on the sound, fast and overeager, a textbook rookie's rush across open space. Left hand out to measure. Right hand coiled. He expected a retreat. Most men give ground when another human sprints at them in front of 20,000 witnesses. Chuck gave none. He pivoted just enough to set the angle, weight sinking by degrees you could only see if you knew to look. His lead hand rose not to block, but to greet the incoming line. Eli's measuring hand touched glove, and found not resistance, but direction, a path waiting where he hadn't intended to go. The camera zoomed until the world was gloves and cheekbones and the small, quiet mechanics of consequence. Even the booers shut up to hear it. Eli's right shoulder twitched. Here came the shot. He let it go with the confidence of youth, hips turned, breath tight, eyes locked on the target that had not moved. Chuck's left hand was already on the way. Not a punch, not yet. A touch, a lever, an answer written in inches. And in that knife-thin instant, the rush, the breath, the weight, 20,000 people felt the future tilt without yet seeing where it would land. The first charge was sloppy, but the kind of sloppy that made crowds roar. Eli came forward swinging with the energy of a street fight, hooks wide, chin high, shouting as he threw. Each punch slapped against Chuck's guard, or cut through air where Chuck's head had been a second earlier. The rookie grinned between swings, as if daring the cameras to catch his bravado. "You're slow," Eli barked, circling, throwing another looping right. "Come on, Ranger, give me something." Chuck gave him nothing. He leaned just enough to let the strike pass, shoulders turning, foot sliding half an inch to reset. No wasted energy, no showmanship. It looked almost boring, until you realized every miss was costing Eli twice the effort. At first the audience cheered the kid's aggression, hollering as gloves snapped through space. But the cheers shifted, uncertain, as seconds stretched and Chuck hadn't taken a clean shot. Some fans started booing, not at Chuck, but at Eli, whose attacks already looked desperate. His smirk slipped each time his glove hit empty air. Dana White, standing just outside the cage, cupped his hands to his mouth. "Press him! Don't give him room!" His voice cracked over the noise, the edge of command cutting into panic. Eli responded with more volume than control. He swung in flurries, head low, feet tangling beneath him. Chuck stepped aside, letting the storm burn itself out. He didn't raise his voice, didn't taunt. He simply let Eli spend himself. Then, without warning, Chuck shifted. Eli lunged forward on another wild hook. Chuck bent slightly at the waist, caught Eli's momentum, and swept his lead leg with one sharp, economical movement. The sound of canvas meeting skin rang out as Eli's back slammed to the mat. The arena detonated. Gasps turned into shouts, shouts into a deafening roar. Thousands leapt to their feet, fists in the air, as if they had witnessed something historic. Eli scrambled up, face red with shock, scrambling to mask it with bravado. "Lucky!" he shouted, jabbing a finger toward Chuck. "Do it again if you can!" But the crack in his voice betrayed him. Cameras cut instantly to Dana White. For the first time all evening, the smirk was gone. His lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowed, hands gripping the top of the cage. Inside, Chuck had already reset. No celebration, no gesture to the crowd. He stood in the same relaxed stance, breathing even, gloves low but ready. His body looked as though nothing had happened, like the sweep had been routine, a note written in the margin of a longer story. Eli came forward again, this time slower, testing. He jabbed once, twice, but the rhythm was broken. His confidence was bleeding out through his posture. Every time Chuck shifted, the kid flinched. Every time Chuck blinked, the crowd screamed as though expecting another collapse. The booing grew louder, sharper, directed now at Eli's arrogance. A chant rose up in pockets, spreading like sparks across dry grass. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" It rolled around the arena in uneven waves, climbing higher, breaking over the cage like surf. Eli's face hardened. He wiped sweat from his eyes with the back of his glove and shouted over the noise. "I'm not done! You hear me? I'm not—" He lunged again, sloppy, telegraphed, fists flailing. Chuck didn't move until the last possible second. He shifted, let the glove brush past his cheek, and tapped Eli's ribs with a clean counter before sliding back out of range. It wasn't powerful, wasn't flashy, but it was surgical. The crowd howled. Eli stumbled a half step, surprised more by the ease of it than the sting. His breathing came heavier now, his chest rising and falling, and his eyes flicked to Dana for reassurance. But Dana wasn't laughing anymore. The cameras cut between them. Eli, sweating, swinging harder and missing wider. Chuck, conserving energy, moving just enough to deflect, to dodge, to punish. The contrast was unmistakable. Youth against experience, chaos against discipline. One was burning fuel in every second, The other was writing a lesson with silence and timing. By the end of the first minute, the fight had changed shape. It no longer looked like a stunt or a playful exhibition. Every person in the arena, from the nosebleeds to ringside, felt it. This was no show. It was a test. And Chuck Norris wasn't failing. The bell hadn't even rung yet, but already the rookie's swagger was gone. The crowd had chosen sides, and Dana White, stone-faced at the cage wall, had just realized the narrative he tried to script was slipping out of his hands. Eli came up from the canvas faster than he should have, teeth bared, eyes flashing with humiliation. He was breathing hard, shoulders heaving, the flush on his neck creeping higher toward his ears. The sweep still echoed in the crowd's memory, and he needed to erase it. He didn't wait. He charged again, fists pumping like pistons, but the rhythm was gone. His movements rushed, sloppy. The precision he might have once trained for had been smothered by rage. Chuck didn't step back. He pivoted just enough, sliding out of the line of fire. Eli's fists skimmed the air. Another hook, wider this time, slapped against Chuck's glove and went nowhere. The older man angled off, barely moving, letting Eli's own weight carry him forward. "You scared, old man," Eli barked, voice cracking. He lunged again. Chuck turned the punch aside with his forearm and gave him nothing back, just a look, steady and calm. The crowd had shifted fully now. Boos chased Eli around the cage. His swagger, once cheered, now looked childish. People began clapping in unison, 3 beats at a time, chanting, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound thickened the air, pressing down on every movement. Eli snarled, frustration leaking out in every gesture. He tried a body kick, sloppy and desperate. Chuck caught the leg under his arm, twisted gently, and guided Eli backward. The rookie stumbled, nearly toppling. Chuck let go before damage could land. The restraint only made the crowd louder. Dana White was on his feet at the cage edge, veins standing in his neck. "Don't stop! Keep going! Put him down!" His voice cracked like a desperate coach watching a fight slip away. Eli obeyed, but his attack was wild now. He barreled forward, arms flailing in a messy combination, trying to smother Chuck with volume. For a few seconds, it looked like chaos might win. Gloves hammering against arms, shoulders, chest. But then, in a blur too fast for most eyes, Chuck shifted. He caught Eli's overextended arm, rotated his hips, and used the kid's momentum against him. The technique was clean, effortless, older than either of them, a classic judo throw done with such precision that Eli was weightless for a heartbeat before slamming onto the mat. The arena detonated. People rose from their seats, beer spilling, strangers hugging. The sound wasn't cheering anymore. It was reverence. Eli lay flat on the canvas for a second, blinking up at the lights, stunned. He scrambled up on instinct, but his eyes betrayed him. The bravado was gone. He was rattled, lost in the storm he had helped create. Chuck waited. He didn't chase, didn't strike while Eli was down. He simply reset his stance, steady, patient. The quiet confidence screamed louder than any punch. Eli threw another jab, but it lacked conviction. His feet tangled as he tried to reset. He swung again, overcommitting, and Chuck met him with a parry so gentle it looked like he was brushing dust from a shelf. Eli staggered forward, catching himself against the cage wall. The cameras caught Dana White in that instant. He was still yelling, but the edge of command had turned brittle. His jaw clenched, his words drowned out by the chant now rolling through the arena. He looked less like a promoter running the show, and more like a gambler watching his last chips burn. The chant swelled into a roar. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. It wasn't just a cheer anymore. It was a verdict. The crowd had chosen their hero. They wanted blood, but they didn't need it. They wanted dominance, and they had already seen it. Eli shook his head, sweat flying, muttering under his breath. He tried to rally himself with one last flurry, but his arms were heavy now, his breathing ragged. Each swing missed wider than the last. Each dodge from Chuck looked easier, smoother. Then Chuck countered again, this time with a sweep of the legs, followed by a soft push on Eli's shoulder. The young fighter dropped hard to his knees. The sound of his body hitting the mat was drowned by the eruption from the stands. The rookie stayed down longer this time, palms on the canvas, chest heaving. When he finally stood, the confusion in his eyes was clear. He wasn't fighting Chuck anymore. He was fighting the weight of the entire arena pressing down on him. And for the first time, even Dana White stopped shouting. The cage was no longer a stage for spectacle. It had become a classroom, and Eli Martinez was failing every lesson. Eli's chest was heaving, his arms heavy as if each glove weighed a stone. His face was flushed red, sweat dripping from his hairline, his mouth guard bobbing with ragged breaths. But pride has its own fuel, and he wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. The chant of Chuck, Chuck, Chuck rolled around the arena like thunder, drowning every attempt Eli made to fire himself up. He slapped his gloves together, spat a curse, and charged. This wasn't strategy anymore. It was desperation. He sprinted across the canvas, swinging wide, wild haymakers that carried all the frustration of the last few minutes. The crowd gasped at the recklessness, some even crying out in alarm. For a moment, it looked like Eli might catch Chuck by sheer chaos, an accidental punch, a wild swing landing clean. But Chuck didn't move until the moment was ripe. He stepped to the side, let Eli's momentum carry him through, and then shifted his hips with surgical precision. His arm slid under Eli's, his grip tightened, and in one fluid motion he redirected all that reckless energy into the air. Eli left the ground. For a second, the rookie hung weightless, legs kicking in empty space, body helpless against physics. Then, impact. He slammed onto the mat with a hollow thud that reverberated through the cage walls. The arena froze. For one suspended heartbeat, there was only silence. Tens of thousands holding their breath together. Then the roar came, louder than anything before. It shook the rafters, rattled the cameras, filled every corner with pure eruption. Eli lay there, blinking, his chest rising and falling like a man who had sprinted headfirst into a wall. He tried to push himself up, elbows shaking under him. His face was pale, eyes wide, disbelief etched into every line. The kid who had smirked into the microphone minutes earlier now looked younger, smaller, crushed under the weight of what had just happened. The cameras cut to Dana White. His face was stone, no smile left, lips pressed tight. For once, the promoter had nothing to say. The spectacle he had orchestrated had turned on him, live, in front of the world. Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't raise his fists or celebrate. He simply stood over Eli, steady, his breathing calm, his eyes soft. He reached down, hooked a hand under Eli's arm, and helped him up. The gesture was quiet, almost paternal. Then, with one motion that silenced the crowd into reverent stillness, Chuck raised Eli's hand into the air. It wasn't triumph. It was respect. A message delivered without words. This young fighter had stepped up, had taken the test, and that meant something. The tension in the arena broke like a wave. The crowd, already on its feet, erupted into applause that shook the floor. People weren't just cheering for Chuck now. They were cheering for the lesson, for the reminder of what fighting and respect was supposed to mean. Eli stood with his arm in Chuck's grasp, head bowed, chest still heaving. He couldn't meet Chuck's eyes, but he didn't pull away either. For him, the night had been humiliation but also initiation. And the gesture told everyone watching that losing to a legend wasn't failure. It was learning. Chuck released his arm and turned toward the cage wall. He didn't speak into a microphone, didn't address the cameras. But as he walked, someone near ringside swore they heard him murmur, "Real strength isn't in breaking down others, it's in holding them up." The words never made it to the broadcast, but they didn't need to. The moment had already spoken louder than any soundbite. Fans clapped until their palms stung. Some stood on their chairs, fists in the air. Others wiped tears they pretended were just sweat. Around the cage, strangers hugged each other, united in the knowledge that they had just seen something that would be remembered far longer than any title fight. Dana White sat back in his chair, silent. His show had been hijacked by reality, by a man who hadn't needed lights, microphones, or promotion to prove his point. Legends didn't fade when mocked. They waited, quiet, until someone forced them to remind the world who they were. Chuck stepped through the cage door, calm, unhurried, blending into the shadows as quickly as he had been pulled into the spotlight. The chants followed him out. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" A sound that would echo in that arena long after the seats emptied. Eli leaned against the fence, sweat dripping, watching him go. His face carried defeat, but also something new. Respect, carved deep by the lesson he hadn't wanted but couldn't ignore. The broadcast cameras panned wide, catching the full sweep of the arena. The crowd still roaring, the cage floor still trembling. Dana's silence and Chuck's back disappearing into the tunnel. The commentator, his voice trembling, summed it up with a single line that felt like history sealing itself. In the very first round, it became clear: legends don't age. They only wait for their moment to remind the world who they are.